Good evening. Welcome to tonight's live conversation, A Modern Illuminated Haggadah. I'm Dr. Lynley Herbert, Curator of Rare Books and Manuscripts at the Walters Art Museum. And tonight I have the pleasure of speaking with Irvin Ungar. So Irvin is a former pulpit rabbi and an antiquarian bookseller. And he's devoted the past quarter century to scholarship on Arthur Szyk, whose remarkable book we're going to hear more about from him tonight. He's curated and consulted for numerous Schick exhibitions, including at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, the German Historical Museum in Berlin, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Library of Congress, and the New York Historical Society. Irvin is the author of Arthur Szyk, Soldier of Art, which won the 2017 National Jewish Book Award. He is the co-producer of the documentary film Soldier in Art, Arthur Szyk, and the creator and publisher of the luxury limited edition of the Schick Haggadah. He has also served as the curator of the Arthur Szyk Society in California. So, Irv, I just want to welcome you virtually to the Walters Art Museum tonight, and thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be with you.
Thank you. Before I start asking you questions, I just wanted to give a little bit of background about the Walters' own Schick Haggadah, which is why we are talking about this with you tonight. So as a curator, one of my jobs is to seek out works of art that brings new voices and new stories into the museum and into our collection, and also to amplify underrepresented voices as well. So one of the areas that I really wanted to strengthen was our collection of Judaica. The Walters has about 4,500 rare books and manuscripts, but only a small group of those are Jewish texts. So we have, for instance, a fantastic Torah scroll. We have several Esther scrolls, a fragment of a Talmud, a very early one, and we also have some printed books of law in Hebrew. But those contain very little art. And so I was really hoping to bring something into the collection that we could show in the galleries more often. So I've been searching for a Haggadah because it's one of the text types that we did not have in the collection. It's such an important one. And medieval illuminated versions are very, very scarce, and I have not been able to find one. So I don't think that we're going to be able to bring one of those into the collection. So I started looking sort of further afield. And in 2017, I ran into the Schick Haggadah. There was a very special first edition for sale. And I was absolutely blown away by the art, by the story behind the book, which I'm not going to get into because I'm going to ask Irv to tell us about that. But the copy that I did help acquire for the collection is a first edition from 1940. And it is signed by the artist. And it's also printed on parchment, which is really remarkable. And it just has this jewel-like colors. So the book really at once infused the collection with something new and fresh, but it also dovetailed really wonderfully with our collection. And that's kind of always the trick of the curators, to find something that can do both of those things. So it plays wonderfully off of our medieval manuscripts and off of our ancient art because of the stories within the book. And one of the things that I decided to do when we brought the book into the collection was to be able to show it during Passover every year at a different opening in the book, and then to show it in conversation with art that's already in our collection. So for instance, this year it is in our ancient galleries, and it's next to images of pharaohs, and the book is open to Moses before Pharaoh in the Haggadah. So this is something that I think is going to have a wonderful long tradition at the Walters. And last year, Irvin reached out to me, and I was thrilled to hear from you with excitement that we had acquired this book for the museum. And so my first question for you, Irvin, is, why is it important to you that the Walters is displaying this book in our galleries?
Well, again, thanks for having me, Lynley. And I really was thrilled when I learned that you had the Haggadah. I learned by a presentation you had given on the internet, which I thought was so well done that I thought, well, they have this Haggadah, and the person who acquired it spoke so thoughtfully about it. I just had to contact you. It's important that the Haggadah is in your collection, I think, for a few reasons. First of all, through my own scholarship and study, I've determined that this is one of the most important illuminated manuscripts that is created in the 20th century. And when when people spoke about Arthur Szyk and they spoke about this book, for example, when it was published in 1940, that the Times of London said this book is worthy of being considered among the most beautiful books that the hand of man has produced. The editor of the Haggadah, Cecil Roth, who was a prominent historian and art historian in Oxford, had actually said that to call Arthur Szyk the greatest illuminator since the 16th century is no flattery. It is the simple truth which becomes manifest to anyone who studies his work with the care which it deserves. Coming from that perspective, and the fact that Szyk's art is very well known to Jews throughout the world, it's very well known to people who study Haggadahs and Haggadah manuscripts and printed Haggadahs. The fact that it was in your collection really makes a difference to me personally, because it's now being contextualized with other great illuminated manuscripts throughout history. So now people will get a chance. The people of the world will get a chance to come to one of the world's most renowned collections of illuminated manuscripts, and to see Szyk within that context, and to begin to. So it's a whole new audience to which you are bringing Arthur Szyk. So that excited me, and also that he's being shown with other great illuminated manuscripts. So the contextualization that the Walters provided was something which goes beyond the general world in which I have operated, in which Szyk's art has operated. So it was that expanding that made it so important, and to be in such a prestigious institution as yours makes a great deal of difference to me and to Arthur Szyk. So it's a win-win for everybody. It's for the museum, for the viewers, and for Arthur Szyk.
I love that you feel that way. I feel that way too. And I think that having his art with our manuscripts actually amplifies our collection as well. It goes both directions. And so I think it's just so exciting to be able to bring those things together, and we can recombine them in a million different ways and tell different stories. And that's why I'm really excited to have this book.
And what's also interesting is, just one little small thing here, is that this illuminated manuscript of Szyk, which was done between 1934 and 36, and I'll get to the history in a second, but this work was done on paper. This was an illuminated manuscript on paper, and in 1940, it was printed on parchment. So you indicated that it was printed on parchment, on vellum, the skin of a young animal, but it's sort of going in the opposite direction, that here you illuminate the manuscript on paper, but you print it in book form, on parchment. So that's an unusual component to this printing. Yeah.
It's fascinating. And just even the technical, virtuoso qualities of the printing of the book, is remarkable in and of itself. So that brings me to my next question. Who was Arthur Szyk, and sort of how did this book come about?
I thought you might ask that question, so I have an image prepared to share with the audience here. Szyk, let me give 3 dates to put everything in context and to put the Haggadah within context. Szyk was born in 1894 in Łódź, Poland. He was born to a textile manufacturing company, so he was really a textile manufacturing family. He grew up in a upper middle class Jewish community, and in a community that was also, of German Protestants, Polish Catholics, Russian Orthodox, and a Jewish community. So he grew up with a worldview in addition to a Jewish perspective as well. The second date to keep in mind is 1940, which is when Arthur Szyk came to the United States at the encouragement of the British government and the Polish government in exile. And the third date is 1951. So Szyk died 70 years ago. So within that context, then, let me talk about the creation of the Haggadah itself. In 1930, and the little bit of the background of it. In 1933, in the year Hitler came to power, the United States government invited one Jew from Europe to come to the United States to exhibit his works on freedom at the Library of Congress. And Arthur Szyk was invited to come to America, and he exhibited 2 bodies of work dealing with freedom, dealing with George Washington and his times, the American Revolution, and another work, which I hope to refer to in a minute, called The Statutes of Kalisz, which dealt with the freedom of the Jews in the 13th century in Poland and onwards. Those works are exhibited at the Brooklyn Museum and the Library of Congress. And while Schick was here, he was decorated with the George Washington Bicentennial Medal for his works on freedom. And then, this was after he had already been decorated by France with a Palme Académique in 1921, and also by the Polish government with the Gold Cross of Merit in the early 30s. So here's an artist who's being recognized for his works on freedom. He's here in the United States for 7 months, and in July of 34, he goes back to Poland. And it's then that he begins to work on that great book of freedom and Jewish tradition, which is the Haggadah. And from Hitler is now in power for about a year and a half, and Arthur Szyk begins this great book on freedom. Now, freedom isn't for Schick just about what was the ancient Israelites and their freedom from slavery in Egypt. It was about freedom in his own time. So this work is going to have political overtones to it, which I get to in a moment. But from 1934 to 1936, he illuminates 48 leaves on paper, as I mentioned. He carries that illuminated manuscript with him to England in 1937, where he hopes to have it published. And there, a new company is formed, the Beaconsfield Press of Jews from Lvov, Poland, and from London. The Beaconsfield Press, its purpose is to publish only one book, Arthur Szyk's Haggadah. And it is determined that this will be a luxury edition, he supervises the printing from 1937 to 1940. In 1939, World War II breaks out. The bombs of Britain are falling in 1940, and they're publishing Arthur Szyk's Haggadah. It's published in 250 copies, all on vellum, where they have to import the skins, and the finest of skins in the context of the war is extraordinary in itself. When it is published, it is the most expensive new book in the world. In 1940, it sells for $500. Certainly, you can get a nice car for $500 in 1940. But you can also buy homes in many places, certainly in the United States, for $500 in 1940. That is how his book is published. And as I mentioned a few moments earlier, the Times of London said this book was worthy of being considered one of the most beautiful books ever produced by the hand of man. 1940, Schick comes to America. Fast forward, he goes on to become the leading anti-Nazi artist in America as well, taking his technique of illuminated manuscripts and applying it to caricature and cartoon. He dies 1951. In 1956, the Haggadah is published again as a popular edition, 10,000 copies in Israel, and in 57 through the 80s, 90s, year 2000, and I embarked myself in 2008 to publish an entirely new edition of the Haggadah with a new translation and commentary. We could go into that, but we really don't have time to go into the background of the creation of that. But that's the history of the publishing of the Haggadah itself, also mixed in with some of Arthur Szyck's life to give you an idea of what he is thinking, what's going on at the time that's being published.
It's really a remarkable story. It's against all the odds that this book came to be. And I just want to say, you have single-handedly revived his legacy for the world in so many different ways. I know you've spent, decades dedicated to sort of researching all of this and sort of bringing all of it to light for everyone and producing a new version so it's more accessible out there in the world and people are aware of it. So first of all, I just want to thank you for your incredible work, because I worry that he could have fallen into obscurity without that. So thank you for that. But my question for you is, how did you discover Schick? What was it? What was the moment where you went, oh my gosh, I need to dig into this deeply?
Well, I first discovered him when I needed gifts for people in my wedding party over 40 years ago, and I walked into a bookstore in the lower and west side of Manhattan, probably in the 20s or 30s, block publishing. I saw these reproductions of the Schick Haggadah with this blue velvet cover that had been published in the 50s and 60s. I bought a few copies, I think They were $18 a piece at the time. I think my wife claims they were 25, but I went for 18. I told her I didn't pay as much as 25, and we gave them as gifts. Then in my professional life, I became a pulpit rabbi, and I served 13 years as a congregational rabbi in Queens, Forest Hills, New York, and in Burlingame, California, near San Francisco, which is where I live now. And then after 13 years, I left the rabbinate. I entered the rare book and manuscript world. How I entered that, how I became involved, that's another story. But one day I was in an antique shop in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and my foot kicked a box underneath, and I opened it up. This is as a rare bookseller, and I saw these prints, and they were Jewish holiday prints, and they had the same look as the images of the Haggadah from 13 years earlier when I bought them as gifts. And I said, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible!" I started to mat them and sell them at antiquarian book fairs. But I also noticed that Schick had done a Nazi book called The New Order, and it was attacking the Nazis' New Order and the Axis. And I loved it because here was an artist who was doing a religious art and political art, and that was just sort of like an extension of how I saw the Bible as basically a political book. I mean, about justice and freedom and fighting against, against bigotry and all kinds of forms of hatred. Those are political issues in our own day, and they were in Schick's day. And I just loved that because I thought that this artist sort of visually articulated what I saw, what my own view was of the world. And that's how I became interested in Schick. And from the more I told people about who this artist was, and the more people told me they didn't know who he was, didn't know his name, couldn't pronounce his name, didn't know anything, that drove me forward to want to bring Arthur Szyk to the world. But it all started out by needing gifts for my wedding party.
I love that. That is just such a wonderful story. And I love those sort of accidental discoveries that completely change the course of our life. And, you talk about his art being just so powerful and so, interesting. And, when I saw it, of course, I brought my medieval manuscript scholar brain, to it and thought, oh my gosh, this guy is working in the 20th century in this way that both, refers back to this medieval tradition, but he also sort of takes it and like turns it on its head. And so I guess one of my questions that I would love to hear your thoughts about is, why did he choose medieval manuscript illumination as his mode of expression?
Well, I tell you what, let's stay with this slide that's right here in front of us. It's been staring us right in the eye here. This dedication page to King George VI. And here you're going to see why he chose illuminated manuscripts, because I think he believed that was the best way to deliver a message to the public. It was clear, it was concise. When you illuminate a text or you illuminate a message, for Arthur Szyk, he used to say, art is not my aim, it is my means. This was what he was asking. It was always art to deliver some sort of message. And here, let's look at this dedication page to George VI, who became the King of England at the end of 1936, when Schick was finishing all of his original artwork before he went to England in 37. And the question is, and here I want to explain how illuminated manuscript serves his purpose, just with this one page. And then I have something else I'll share with you, is that why would Schick dedicate the book to the King of England in the first place? Well, he's going to England, makes sense, dedicated to the king. But secondly, and more importantly, in 1936, Hitler was in power already for 3 years, and Schick saw England at the forefront of combating and standing up to Nazism. So it makes sense to dedicate the Book of Freedom to the King of England. And what does Schick say? And it may be hard to read on the screen, but let me read it. He says, "At the feet of your most gracious majesty, I humbly lay these works of my hands, shewing forth the afflictions of my people Israel." So this is the message to the King of England. The afflictions of my people, and I want to present them so you're well aware of them. But here's something else that's involved here. There's something wrong with this dedication page. And what is wrong? What's wrong with it is, at the time that Schick created this book, England had already enacted a series of what were called white papers, which restricted the flow and emigration of Jews out of Europe to the land of Israel, to Palestine, to the land of Israel. So the question is, how is Schick going to dedicate this great book of freedom to the British, who had a mandate over Palestine, had restricted its immigration? How is he going to dedicate this book of freedom intellectually and emotionally to England, who's restricting the freedom of Jews? to go to Israel. And here's what he does. He, on the bottom right-hand corner of this image, he paints European Jews who need to have an exodus from Egypt. Remember, this is a book about the exodus of ancient Israelites from Egypt. But this is for Schick about the exodus of the Jews from Europe. And on the bottom left-hand corner, on these gates entering Jerusalem, it's hard to see on the screen, is the Hebrew word Sion, Zion, the land of Israel. And between the Jews leaving Europe and wanting to go to the land of Israel, in the center, he paints a British military ship that prevents and stands between the Jews exiting Europe and going to the land of Israel. And this is how Arthur Szyk introduces the Haggadah as not only a religious book, but also as a political book. And this is how he uses the art of illumination to deliver a message. He also does so, and I said, and that's his most important religious work, but he does so also with these other illuminated texts, such as the Statutes of Kalish, which I would consider to be his most important historical illuminated manuscript, which he illuminated in the 1920s while he was in Paris. And this dealt with the liberties and freedoms extended to the Jews of Poland in the 13th century by Boleslav the Pious, and reaffirmed by Casimir the Great, who's sitting on the throne here. And Schick illuminated it in the 1920s because he felt that the message of the 13th century was as important to the peoples of Europe in the 20th century. That is, if you empower your minorities and grant them civil religious privileges, you too can benefit. And that is on the onset of Hitler coming to power. And it is through this illuminated technique that he is able best to deliver a message. Now, he worked in other genres, he worked in other styles, German Expressionism, Slavic folk art, Polish nationalist art, seeking a Jewish art form, Persian miniatures, and Renaissance art. But this was the real underpinnings of all that he was creating all dealt with this illumination and this detail and this craftsmanship and this excellence of performance, really. And so that's a long way of answering your question, but I didn't expect to take so much time on the King George dedication page, so I'm going to stop here and with that question.
Well, I mean, that was fantastic. Thank you. That's a wonderful explanation. And I wonder if you could then discuss, I know that the Haggadah specifically, he really pushes back against, the rising Nazi forces, through visual means, and he was actually more edgy than we even know.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about how he used his art in that book to sort of push back against the oppression he saw all around him?
Great. And I have some images for that too. But what we need to know is that Schick is always moving history, so that, the dedication, this is a book about the ancient Israelites. He's showing you the European Jews. He has images of European Jews in chains with the pyramids of ancient Egypt, all within the same vignette. But Schick really has two things. There's two things about his Haggadah that make it different from any other Haggadah. It's Schick's emphasis, where he sees, when he's creating this, from 34 to 36, remember, right in the middle is the Nuremberg laws, the racist Nuremberg laws of 1935, which were restricting the freedoms of Jews in Germany. And he's right across the border, daring to create this book of freedom. And what he does here is that he sees Hitler as the new Pharaoh. And there are sketches of Schick drawing Hitler as the new Pharaoh. And he sees the Nazis as the new Egyptians who had come to annihilate his people. And so what he does is, that's one theme. And the second major theme, and I'm going to show you two images dealing with that. And the second theme is heroism. Schick believes that Jews must be heroic, action, not pity. And again, he's calling for heroism in the mid-1930s. Before the full-blown Holocaust, before World War II, he's calling for Jews to become heroic. Let's take a look at a couple of images. This should help in understanding. For example, the Nazis is the new the Egyptians. He paints in this image in the upper right-hand corner the Egyptian taskmaster, blonde hair and blue eyes, hard to see here, which is sort of the Aryan, stereotypical Aryan. But on his chest, Schick had originally painted a swastika, but it was painted over prior to publication, maybe for political correctness, maybe censored by the a board in England who was worried about the relationship with the Germans in the late 1930s, before the war. Who knows? but looking at this image at the United States Holocaust Museum under a particular X-ray equipment, we're able to see the swastika that was painted in the rondel. I don't know if it's clear on the screen, but it is present. And in addition to this image, so this was a way in which Schick was making it incredibly relevant to his own time. The second image happens to be this image, this beautiful image of the 4 questions, where the grandfather is sitting before his grandchild. He's reading from a text. But the snake in the upper right-hand corner, as it appears in your Haggadah, in your copy, and in every edition published since, they've been painted over the swastikas. He painted over them prior to publication. But I discovered a 1935 lithographic print where they were promoting the Haggadah at that time, or seeing what the prints look like. And I found one, and on it, this is one of them, and you can see the swastikas on the back of the snake before it was printed over. It's unbelievable, the layers and layers and layers of meaning that are in this Haggadah, as Schick attempts to deal with the issues of enslavement and freedom in his own day. With regard to heroism, because I'm trying to speak relatively fast here, there are images of David slaying Goliath in the Haggadah. What does David have to do with killing the Philistine? And what does that have to do with Passover? Nothing. But for Schick, everything. Why? Because it's the small standing up to the big. It's the powerless standing up to the powerful. It's standing up to power. And here Schick is showing the audience, the viewers, he hopes to show the viewers the idea of defeating the larger enemy that's before you. Or this image of Moses. You know, Moses' name does not appear in the Haggadah, even though in the Bible, Moses' name is all there for taking the Israelites out of Egypt. But the rabbis kept Moses' name out because they wanted to ascribe God to delivering, to carrying, to redeeming the Israelites, not worship man for this kind of redemption. But Schick, like other artists, but Schick more so than any other artist, puts man back into the Haggadah, puts Moses back into the Haggadah. But he doesn't put him back as a religious leader. If you look at this image of Moses in the center, with Aaron on this side and Hur the warrior on the other, Moses has a strong body. I mean, he's not even with a shirt on. He's as if he came out of a spa, or Jack LaLanne spa, used to be popular when I was a kid, as a bodybuilder. Because this is this is when the arms are raised in the Bible. Moses is a military leader and defeats the Amalekites in battle. So Schick wants to show the warrior aspect to Moses, not the religious part. And this is another way in which he responds and hopes to inspire Jews in his own time. And here, even if we take the great cup of beauty, Elijah's cup, Elijah the prophet, who comes to every Passover Seder, here we focus on the beauty of the cup. But in the center of the cup, Schick doesn't sneak it in, but he places it intricately. Elijah rebuking the wicked Ahab. Again, symbolism, stand up. This part doesn't belong in the Passover story, but for Schick, it absolutely belongs. And so this is how these issues of his own day and our own day today, that we must all be vigilant in our own day. We want freedom, we have to be willing to fight for it. And Schick saw himself as FDR's soldier in art during the war, later after he finished the Haggadah, because he saw himself as a fighting artist. So he used his art in that way. One more thing. Please, as we focus on this, and I'm delivering on the messages, do not lose track of the beauty of the art itself. It's try to combine both aspects in one thought at one time. I know that's hard. I was focusing on the messages, but I don't want to detract from the greatness of the calligraphy, which by the way, with illuminated manuscripts, oftentimes you have the artist and you have the calligrapher. Schick did both. Mm-hmm. So those are the ways in which his art applies.
It's remarkable. And he died fairly young, in his 50s. So this year actually marks the 70th anniversary of his death.
Correct.
Which feels like a long time that, he was sort of not, discussed for a long time, and he's really having sort of a resurgence. And I guess my final question for you is, why does his legacy matter? Why are we continuing to explore his art?
Well, here's what I would say about that. because the values that Schick dealt with were eternal. You know, when you deal with injustice and bigotry, racism, and you're dealing for justice and freedom, those issues he was dealing with then are applicable in our own day. And when Schick created his art, he said, I'm creating it for permanence. So he felt as if it belonged. You know, I was once interviewing Schick's daughter, and I was friendly with Alexander, who died a few years ago, for over 25 years. So I tried to learn all of from the inside, what the family knew, what friends knew. And she once said to me, you know, in a casual interview, you know, Schick's Haggadah, it's universal. It's for everyone. And, you know, that's a thing that a daughter would say. That's what anyone might say who really embraces it. But here's why I think she was absolutely right. I mean, this is a text for the Jewish people, but it's not merely a text for the Jewish people. That is because the issues itself are universal issues. And Schick, who held quite firmly the idea that if I'm not for myself, who will be for me, also held by Hillel's dictum, the first century sage, who also said, but if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? And so Schick, who believed deeply in his own people, hoped to use that value system as a Jew to be an advocate for humanity at large, which is to say, care about who you are as a Jew, care about your own people. If you are a Christian, care about your own people and what they have to say, and use the best of its tradition to be an advocate for humanity at large. If you're a Muslim, care about your own people and use its values to be universal in scope. This is Arthur Szyk. And I think I can even share this, even this last slide, which sort of emphasizes not only his own feeling about where his art comes from, but here he says in his dedication page at the end, I showed you the King George dedication page in English. The last dedication page is in French. And there he says, I am but a Jew praying in art. If I have succeeded in any measure, if I've gained the power of reception among the elite of the world, I owe it all to the teachings, the traditions, and the eternal virtues of my people. You know, so much what I've talked about focused on the messages in Schick's art. Here's what I've come to understand from all of this, to put it all together. That behind this great messages and behind this great art stands Arthur Szyk, the great man. And it is this heroic aspect also that is also important in our own day. And that combined with the great art, the great messages, and the great man. We need all of them in our day. We need great beauty. We need time to appreciate it. If he and his Haggadah can give us time to pause, to reflect on the greatness of creativity, of the greatness of the beauty of the world around us, how we can use it to help make the world a better place, and realize that all of us have a role to play in it, then it truly makes the Haggadah, a Jewish text, a universal one as well.
That is beautiful. Thank you. That is an amazing answer. I don't even know how to follow that. I think we are at time, but we do have one question. Would you have 2 seconds to answer one question?
You talk about Schick, I've got all night.
Excellent. So we do have one question from Renee Powell. Okay. Do we know how the King of England responded to the dedication page?
It's a great question. It turns out I had a letter in my possession, because I once owned all the family archives, which are actually now at a university on the West Coast, Berkeley. Is that I had this letter that was from the king, the librarian of King George's library, who sent the publishers of the Beaconsfield Press publishers and Schick a note saying that the king loves having this book, and that for a fortnight, for over 2 weeks, he would keep this book at Windsor Castle and he would show it to anyone who would come to visit. But we don't know, and he didn't say in the letter, that that he noticed the dedication page to him in which Schick is calling out England and its responsibility. Nothing is mentioned that, and nothing is mentioned about the fact that on that bottom of that page, Schick painted his own self-portrait with a palette in hand, dressed in military garb, like a soldier in art, he couldn't be any clearer about where he stood, but nothing. We don't know about the king's response to that.
It's fascinating. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the question, Renee. So I think we are at time. I just want to thank you so much, Irvin. This has been just remarkable. And I've learned a lot, and I hope everybody out there has as well. So thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your incredible knowledge about Arthur Szyk and this incredible book.
Well, I'm really the one who thanks you. And anyone who gives me a forum and a place to talk about Arthur Szyk, I'm the one who offers you thanks. So let's just both accept it and call us even. And I'm delighted. Thank you really for this opportunity.
This is wonderful. And just very quickly, big thank you to our digital team for supporting this program tonight. And a bigger thank you to all of you out there in the audience for attending. And I hope that you will come to our future offerings of programs. And I guess that's good night. So good night, everyone.
Thank you, Lynley. Thank you.
Yeah.